Welcome to the Page Turnerz podcast, where book lovers unite to celebrate the enchanting world of fiction. With your host, Paul A. Brooks. In each episode, we'll dive into the captivating realms of storytelling, exploring the pages that transport us to magical places and introduce us to unforgettable characters. In each episode, we'll embark on a creative expedition through the minds of seasoned and emerging writers to unravel the mysteries and unveil the passion that fuels their stories. Join us on this odyssey through the pages and pixels of imagination, where words become worlds and stories illuminate our lives. So, pour yourself a coffee and immerse yourself in discussions about writing, gripping plots, heroes and villains, and the sheer joy of escaping into a well-crafted story.
On today's podcast, I had the pleasure of speaking to award-winning multi-genre author Penny Haw, a writer of inspiring historical fiction and contemporary fiction and children's books. We had a great time talking about her work and her experience of finding and working with a traditional publisher. This is the wonderful Penny Haw. Hi, Penny, and welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for coming today. It's really nice to meet you.
Thank you, Paul. It's an honor to be here. It's very exciting to be able to talk about my books and my process. Thank you.
Yeah, no, it's great. I mean, author to author, writer to writer, it's really nice to talk about writing, and I find it fascinating comparing how I write to how people who come on the podcast like yourself, how you write as well. Now, you're in South Africa, that's right, isn't it?
Yes, that's correct. I live in Hart Bay. It's close to Cape Town.
Right.
So I live on the coast. In fact,
Lovely.
If I look out of my office window, I can see the mountain and the Atlantic just below. So it's a very beautiful little fishing village that I live in.
Oh, that's lovely. I look out of my window and I see rain. It's classic British summer weather. The clocks have just gone forward here, so we are now officially in British summertime.
Yes.
Although it doesn't look particularly summery, even though I am wearing a t-shirt because it's warm in here.
Yeah, well, obviously we've just hit autumn, and I do have a long sleeve shirt on today, but it probably is the first day, and it's not 100% necessary, so it's lovely here.
Yeah, we just come back from vacation a couple of weeks ago where we spent some time in the Canary Islands, which we try to go to every year. And it's beautiful there. It's that microclimate where it's just warm. And it's so nice just to be able to wear shorts and t-shirt and flip-flops, and that's it. So it's really nice.
Yeah.
And so, as I said, thank you so much for coming. And you are traditionally published as well. And I'm going to put that out there because most of the people that I speak to, most of the other authors like myself, we're indie publishers. We kind of do everything ourselves. So we'll be really interested in talking about that a little bit as well, your kind of process with that. But in your background, you, in a previous incarnation, I don't know if you still do it, but you wrote for newspapers and magazines. So are you still involved with that?
No, actually, I worked as a journalist and a columnist and a business writer for all of my career, but I'm actually now a full-time author, just in the last less than 2 years. So I don't write any articles anymore, but I've been a writer all my life, and it is an incarnation. I mean, one thinks you're a writer, but the process of writing fiction and being a journalist are very different. And I'd always dreamed about writing a book. In fact, I talked about it like many of us do. One day I'm going to write a book. One day, and it was always my plan. But the more I thought about it, and the more I guess the longer I'd been secure in my life as a journalist, the more terrifying the idea of writing long form and trying fiction became. And actually, my son obviously got tired of hearing me say I wished I could do it, and he said, "Just do it."
Just do it.
And I told him a story which I'd grown up with about that my grandmother had told me about a vervet monkey that she had. It was an orphaned vervet monkey, obviously a wild monkey, and she had it had been brought to her because it had been found abandoned, and she was a wonderful animal whisperer of sort, and she took care of this monkey and thought that it would go back into the wild, but he never did. He adopted my grandmother who lived on a farm here in South Africa. He adopted my grandmother and all her domestic animals as his troop, and lived with her until he died of old age. And I'd grown up with the stories of Nico, and I told my son these stories. And so my son said to me, "Why don't you write a children's book about Nico?" So that was my gateway fiction, and it was kind of a soft way of getting into fiction.
Yeah.
So I started by writing a children's book. It's a children's chapter book, so it's for children of ages 9 to 12.
Mm.
But it was a beautiful way of kind of, I guess, giving me the confidence to take the next step.
Yeah.
So I did that while I was still working, and then I loved it. I loved the freedom that doing that kind of writing gave me, which I guess I'd forgotten, having worked so long as a journalist. And yeah, so from there on, I was, okay, I think I can do this, and I continued.
So was Nico your first book that you wrote?
Yes.
You write historical fiction,
Yes.
which we'll talk about as well. And actually, there's on YouTube, which I'll put a link to it in the description once we post this, of the trailer for Nico as well. I watched that this morning on YouTube. That's a lovely video. So well worth a look. Did you find it then, making that transition from writing children's stories into historical fiction, they're two very, very different genres. How was that for you? Did you have a sort of a historical want to write historical fiction prior to that?
In fact, there's a book between the historical fiction and Nico, which was published in 2021. Yeah, it's called The Wilderness Between Us.
Yeah.
And this is contemporary fiction.
Yeah.
So what actually happened, Paul, was when I'd written the children's book and it was published, some people got in touch with me. You talk about working with other writers and writers groups and what have you. And there were some other writers in my village who I didn't know, but who contacted me, and they'd seen that I'd written this children's book, and they said they were wanting to establish a writers group where we would workshop each other's work and what have you, and would I be interested in joining? And at that point, I hadn't decided whether I was going to continue writing, writing fiction. And because I'd had such an enjoyable experience writing Nico, I thought, well, maybe I should try it. I was still working full time, so I agreed that I would join them. So that was actually, it was a brilliant way of keeping the momentum going.
Yeah.
And I started to write contemporary fiction. The Wilderness Between Us is based on a hiking trip which I did in it's a forest here in South Africa called the Tsitsikamma Forest, which is a magnificent mountainous area. And I'd done a hike with a group of friends. And while I was doing the hike, I'd imagine these scenarios of things going wrong. Fortunately for us, nothing went wrong. It's a multi-day hike. But so I wrote the contemporary fiction, and that was published in 2021 by a US publisher. And I found a literary agent then. And then I came to historical fiction by mistake, because I wanted to, I was going to, but by this stage, once I'd written The Wilderness Between Us, I was kind of hooked on the idea, and I thought, I'm going to keep trying to do this, but I was still working. But I thought about writing something that would be set in a veterinary practice, because I love animals, and I had once dreamt of being a vet, and it often occurs to me when I go to the vet rooms here with my dogs, is how animal lovers really lionize vets. We sit there and we look at these vets and, hope that they can treat our animals. And I thought it would be an interesting story. And I was particularly interested in having a strong female character who would be a veterinary surgeon and talk about her struggles, maybe in a rural environment. And I researched when women became vets, and that was when I came across the most extraordinary woman called Aileen Cust.
Yeah.
Yes, who Aileen Cust is Britain and Ireland's first woman veterinary surgeon, and she overcame a myriad of obstacles, from obvious Victorian society. She was an aristocratic Englishwoman who was born in Ireland. Women were not educated, women were not trained. Aristocratic women were definitely not encouraged to work or seek a profession. And I found this story and I thought, well, somebody must have written historical fiction about this woman. I was so captivated by her story, and I was shocked actually to find that nobody had written her story.
Yeah.
And so that's actually how I came to historical fiction. So
You can
I told
imagine-
my
Sorry, I was going
sorry.
to say, you can imagine her struggles, though. Late 19th century, presumably, we're
Yes.
talking about here, sort of, towards the end of the
Yeah. Yeah.
You can imagine her struggles of actually trying to get acceptance and then clients on top of that.
Yes. Yeah.
Absolutely
Yeah.
fascinating.
An absolutely fascinating story. And her best friend was Dorothy Gray, who was the wife of Sir Edward Grey. So, who obviously came to be known during the early start of the First World War and what have you. And there were all these fascinating links to her life and people of those times. So that was how I came to historical fiction. And I then said to my literary agent, to an American literary agent, this is what I want to write. And she said, no, I'm not interested, because she felt that well, first of all, she had signed me as an author of contemporary fiction. So it was a bit of a pivot.
Yeah.
And she felt that the story would be almost too quiet, which is something one comes across in publishing a lot, that the story will be too quiet.
Yeah.
But I was so captivated by the story, Paul. I actually, so she and I parted ways because she said, well, you need to find someone else. So I wrote the story then unrepresented, and was very lucky to get interest from Source Books in the US, who are a fabulous publisher. Honestly, if any listeners are thinking of going the traditional publishing route, I can't speak highly enough of this remarkable. They're probably they're one of the biggest, until recently, completely independent publishers of the big five or big six. But recently, Penguin Random House has increased a shareholding in them. And although the founder, a woman called Dominique Rucker, is still the CEO, I think that the ownership has tipped in the favor of Penguin Random House. But anyway, fortunately, it doesn't impact the authors. You still work very much with this fantastically dynamic publishing house. But anyway, I was lucky enough to get some interest there, and the acquiring editor who was interested in it said, but we like to deal with a literary agent. So then I had an offer in hand, and I was able to find a literary agent who is very well versed in historical fiction.
Did you do that? Did you find that agent yourself, or were you recommended to an agent?
No, I found her myself. Because I had been looking for another literary agent after my literary agent and I went our separate ways. So I did know who was strong in historical fiction. So I could go then. It was a very fortunate thing that I could go almost with an offer in hand.
Yeah.
And say, I have this offer, but the publisher would like me to be represented. Are you interested? And I was very lucky. My agent, very experienced. Her name is Jill Marsel, and she lives in San Diego. And she guided me on obviously that contract, and she recommended. She said, "Well, let's make it a 2-book deal," even though I didn't have a book ready then. And that was where the idea of The Woman at the Wheel, the story of Bertha Benz, came about.
Great story. Yeah. Absolutely fantastic.
Yeah.
So your route then to being traditionally published was you didn't have to sort of experience the Stephen King thing where he talks about putting a bigger nail for all of his rejection slips on the wall.
Oh no, I did. I've got a book, Paul, I can show you. the lists. I mean, I made notes of the rejections and the before I found a publisher for The Wilderness Between Us, and then when I had The Invincible Miss Cust written, and I was looking, honestly, I could paper the biggest church hall around with my rejection. So I definitely did go through that, and so it hasn't been it definitely wasn't. I wasn't one of those lucky people who just kind of put out one or two queries and was lucky. There was a lot of rejection, and I guess I'm just a very stubborn woman, and I've just kept at it.
But don't you think that's a testament, though, to a writer's determination to get their story out? I mean, and regardless of people saying no, 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 at some point you're going to find someone who say, actually, that sounds really interesting. So it is that persistence and perseverance, and I think that's a lot of the area that a lot of readers don't actually see when they buy a book, which is great. Thank you for buying the books, but they don't see the struggle behind getting the story out there. I think you must have such a determination, a real motivation, and a love for writing, to get your story out there. So let's talk a little bit about The Woman at the Wheel then.
Yes.
Bertha Benz. I'll let you take it away, because fascinating story.
So in fact, the way I'd come across Bertha Benz, because when Jill, my literary agent, said to me, well, they're interested in this book, but let's kind of future-proof you a bit. Let's get another book in on the deal, which is why you have an agent. Those are the kind of things as an author you don't know and you don't think about. So she advised me. She said, you need something that's in the same kind of genre, maybe a similar kind of theme, a woman that's gone under the radar. So when I working as a journalist, I'd been working on a supplement for Business Day. It's a business newspaper here in South Africa, around Women's Day, where we had looked at, once a year we celebrate women, as it is. And we'd been looking at women in history, in science and technology and engineering and mathematics.
Wow.
And I'd been doing some research, and I'd come across this very short, it might have only been a paragraph, this is years ago, about Carl Benz's wife, Bertha Benz, who had undertaken this extraordinary, it's known as the first long distance test drive in the world, where she drove this machine. It was the Benz Motorwagen. It was the prototype Benz Motorwagen between Mannheim and Forsheim in Germany. It was 106 kilometers. And she was in her 30s, so she was a relatively young woman, and she drove that vehicle without her husband's consent, with her teenage sons, over this distance, to demonstrate that it was it could endure that distance. And when I read that, I thought, there's a lot to this woman that isn't said here, because she hasn't just rolled this vehicle out of the workshop in the dark of the morning. She and her son, that they actually pushed it to the outskirts of Mannheim, so that, because it was very noisy and smoky and what have you, they pushed it to the outskirts of Mannheim before they started it, because they didn't want to wake up the Carl. And I thought, there must be more to this woman. And so when Jill and I were talking, I thought, that might be an idea. So that's where Bertha Benz came about. And certainly when I started to do some research, she was as much of a visionary as her husband. I mean, he was an extraordinary inventor and engineer. I mean, his dream, and she fell in love with, as much as she fell in love with him, she fell in love with his dream of creating this horseless carriage, which was a completely bizarre concept at that time. I mean, it was unimaginable to people. Horses drove everything. Horses were the carriages and transport and army and used in industry. And suddenly you're saying, no, we're going to do something that's going to be horseless. It was inconceivable. But he had this vision, and Bertha bought into it. And they had they had an extraordinary relationship because he he didn't talk down to her, he didn't patronize her, he treated her as an equal, and she had many talents that he lacked. For example, I mean, he was, as I say, he was an extraordinary engineer and inventor, and obviously an artisan, because I mean he built 400 components to put together for this vehicle.
Yeah.
But she had the ability to understand the value of partnerships, and they weren't a wealthy family. She invested her dowry and her inheritance in his business before they were married even. I mean, that's how advanced this woman was. She was an entrepreneur before the word was even invented.
I would say she was probably more entrepreneurial than he was.
She really was. And
Yeah.
I mean, they needed to be together to do these things. But the whole purpose behind her drive, I mean, she understood that machine. If you read the book, if you read anything about her, you'll realize that it was a troubleshooting journey, in fact. But she and her sons could fix that car. They could keep it going for 106 kilometers and then another 106 kilometers to return. So they were also mechanics. But she had an understanding of Carl was reticent. He was a bit impatient. You know how I don't know if you know people who are very clever. They sometimes don't have patience with people who are less clever.
Less. Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
And he was a little intolerant, and Bertha, Bertha could see that, and she could manage it. So really an extraordinary woman, and it was a very beautiful book to write. I absolutely loved it.
Yeah. So how long did it take you to write it then? Once you've done all of your research, how long did it take you to write the book?
Once I got the book deals with both the book deals, the timeline was actually quite short. So the whole process was about a year of signing the contract for that book, and then it getting published. It actually, The Woman at the Wheel was published exactly a year after The Invincible Miss Cust. So it was about a year.
Wow.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously an enjoyable process for you, but I wanted to ask you about your writing routine. I'm assuming then that your publisher set the time, gave you a deadline. I want the manuscript done by then, assumingly. So you had that period of time. What is your writing process then for that, to make sure you can meet that deadline?
Yeah. Paul, I always say that I think because of my training as a journalist, I'm a very disciplined writer. I understand that, bum in seat.
Yeah.
And as long as you're at your computer and the internet is not distracting you, you need to be writing.
Yeah.
And obviously it's when you write historical fiction, I think that the internet, or well, in fact, I shouldn't say that, because any writing process requires you to check things while you're writing. And if you're anything like me, you go down these dreadful rabbit holes where you almost forget, why did I Google? What was I Googling? When you get back to your writing.
Yeah.
But I'm very disciplined. I'm very lucky now that I am writing fiction full time, so I don't have to fit it in after hours. Which, I mean, when I was working, it was like my guilty pleasure. I felt like I couldn't work on my fiction during work hours, kind of thing. But I'm very lucky now that I can work on it whenever I'm at my desk. And I think for me, the joy, and this is what I think is key in writing, is that I love it.
Yeah.
And so it doesn't seem like work for me. I think when you emailed me the other day, you said that you got caught up in your rewrites or something. And I love the idea of other authors just becoming so involved with things that everything else disappears, because that is something that you really love.
Yeah.
And obviously there are times when it's harder. I mean, I've started I've got another book deal with Source Books as well for another 2 books. So I've finished one and I've just started the other one. And I've got a deadline of later this year for that one. And I'm a little bit behind. So, there are times where you get a little panicky and you
Yes.
start working out,
Mm.
okay, I need to deliver this at the end of October. That's so many weeks. I need to write this number of words. How many days? So I do that. But somehow I know I'll get there. But the main thing for me is I think I'm just so lucky because I love it. I love it. I love disappearing into the story. I said to a writing friend the other day when I was starting the next book and like being set somewhere else, it's a bit like moving to a new town and having to make new friends and discover where the shops are and where the lovely walks along the river are, and that kind of thing. It's but it's very exciting.
Yeah, I think when people ask me sometimes, where do you get your ideas from? And I was
Yes.
saying this to Danny C the other day when I spoke to him about it. Mine are very much from daydreams. I daydream it, and
Yeah.
you were talking about getting lost in your world and from the idea from the daydream, you are very lost in what's going on, and I'm a pantser very much.
Yeah.
I write by the seat of my pants. And sometimes, and you said earlier on when you were doing your research, you can go down these rabbit holes.
Yes.
I find that happens a lot to me, different ideas. And sometimes I don't know where this idea has come from or
Yeah.
it sort of appeared in them. I've got notebooks here, there, and everywhere, and the whiteboard behind me. But so I tend to write a lot of notes. Very few ideas actually get into the book, but
Yes.
I write those kind of ideas. Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, that daydream, that a place where you can lose yourself in your
Yeah.
writing is a wonderful process, and it's so nice because that's where the love of your writing and your craft comes from, really,
Yeah.
isn't it?
And I also think that it shows in the final product.
Yeah, yeah,
When you read something and there's a sense of how much of the story the author was enjoying. So that, I mean, I know there's so much advice out there. Someone asked me the other day about, where do you take advice from in as an author? And I said, well, honestly, if you had to consume the amount of advice that's out there, you'd never get a chance to write because we
absolutely,
all have
quite
different
right.
ways, and
Yeah, yeah,
but the one thing that I think is that when you find that subject matter that also just sets you alight,
yes,
that
yeah,
and I think that, I mean, I think I came to Aileen Cust and Bertha Benz, and I relate so much to how amazing these women were, and they excite me. They excite me because I think, wow, we're so far down the line, and yet we think of women as being kind of behind the scenes
yeah,
during those eras, and yet these women were doing remarkable things, and we don't know enough about them, and that really excites me, and I'm excited by people who kind of have a passion and then they do whatever it takes to to feed that passion. I love that, and
yeah,
that's with both these women. That's who they were. They were Bertha Benz's parents wanted her to marry a wealthy man from Forsheim and settle down and raise lots of children, but her father had sent her and her sisters to a very good school because he thought that they would rub shoulders with the wealthy there. So they would meet the daughters and the sisters of wealthy people in Forsheim, which would mean that they would make good marriages.
yeah,
And Bertha was too curious. She was too uh, she she wanted to be part of something bigger. And so when she met Carl Benz, and as I said, she fell in love with his dream as much as him. she was suddenly saw this is a way that I can live a life that's maybe a bit more than what is expected of me.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
So those are the kind of things. So yeah. So my thing there is like really if you can find those things that excite you, then I love writing. And I love writing the stories that excite me. So I mean, I guess
Yeah.
it goes without saying, but yeah.
Thinking about when you're writing it, and particularly because the language that they used during the sort of late 19th century is quite different in terms of the way that we would speak now,
Mm,
and how it's led. Did you do some research behind that, or because we know if I like watching a lot of historical drama on the
yeah.
television, I'm a bit of a sucker for it. And in actual fact,
Yeah.
slightly off topic, my wife and I are going to Highclere House where they filmed Downton Abbey, which was set.
Oh, wow.
So that's
Okay.
next
Yes.
week. Yeah, we're going
Oh,
to that next week.
fabulous.
Yeah, so we're really looking forward to that. So, but watching listening to what you've said, having read some of what you've written
Mm.
and listened to it as well, um, the language that they use is quite different. It's very polite. It's
Yes.
very structured. Did you have to kind of work to get your prose down so that it did that? It showed that?
Um, I think my own reading helped me with that.
Hmm.
Definitely. Uh, and yeah, I mean, it's very so obviously The Invincible Miss Cust is based in Ireland and Britain primarily, and then there's a bit in France during World War One. And she was an aristocratic English woman. So yeah, it 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 what does this sounds it actually came easy. I think yeah, I don't know why, but it actually did. And I think it comes from reading
Yeah,
that kind of thing.
yeah.
Yeah. Bertha Benz, that's obviously a German story, so I had to write in a German accent. How do you do that?
Yeah, well, yeah, exactly. Absolutely. Yeah.
No, I didn't do that. But I um I definitely didn't. I mean, I use a few German words. For example, she calls her father and her mother Vater and
Yeah.
Mutter.
Yeah.
Yeah. But because it's written in English and because it's published in the US, it's American English,
Right.
which that was probably more of an adjustment for me than actually writing in that voice of, especially since they're both written in the first person. So I'm writing first of all in Aileen Cust's voice, and then in Bertha Benz's voice. But um, that I didn't find difficult, and maybe I haven't done it perfectly, but I didn't find it difficult. But the adjustment for me with writing, because in South Africa South African English is British English,
Hmm.
so it was an adjustment for me to use American English, and I thought I would cringe when I dropped all those U's and favor, but actually I got used to it, and
I've
it's
done the same. I've done the same. Color,
yeah,
COLOR, that those kind of things. So yeah. I mean, having read it and listened to the extracts on Audible,
yeah,
um, and you said you found it very easy. It seems perfectly right for that
thank
era
you,
that you've written in. So I think you've done a
yeah,
great job on that. It's
yeah,
really good.
thank you,
And
thank you.
you really have. And talking about having it recorded, they're both on Audible. What was your experience of getting that done? Was that something that the publisher organized, or was it something
Yes.
that you did?
So when you were talking earlier about the difference between publishing traditionally and independently, so
Hmm.
that is I I read these things about how indie authors, traditional authors, and it occurs to me so often that we have more in common than we have we
Yeah,
have
yeah,
differences, to be
yeah.
honest. But but when you find a great publisher, and honestly, I really do think I've been so lucky with Source Books. Things like the audio rights. Obviously, I signed my agent my contract. I signed the audio rights over to the publisher. Um, they sell them on to a recording publisher.
Mhm.
So I will get for both of these books, I get notification. Good news, we've sold your audio rights to the first one was forgetting the name of it, but anyway, R&B books and
Blackwoods.
Black yes,
I
sorry,
know
I
you're
really
talking about.
should know them, but they're two pretty well-known audio publishers. So then they so with my deals, obviously I get paid in advance, and then you authors know how this works. Obviously I have to pay back my advance before I earn any royalties. So the audio rights which are sold by Source Books, the amount that they make from that gets added to the to my advance. So my portion of that. So it means that I'm paying back my advance much quicker.
Yeah.
But so honestly, I had nothing to do with it, to be honest. I just got the email that says, good news, we've got an audio deal. And then what happened there was, I mean, I know some authors, and probably more experienced authors than myself have had input with who will narrate their books. That they've demanded that. I certainly didn't. And I think I've been lucky in both instances with the narrators. They and I'm actually in touch with those narrators now. We've kind of become friends because it's quite a nerve-wracking thing. I don't know if you've recorded any of your books audio, whether you've done audio with any of your books, Paul. But it's quite,
not yet. It's in the plan, but I haven't, not yet.
It's quite nerve-wracking to
imagine
to listen to someone reading it. And so when I with the Invincible Miscast, I had to almost build myself up to it. I'd listened to I'd been in touch with Lucy Rayner, who's the narrator of it, and she's actually an English woman who's lived in she lived in Edinburgh for quite a while. Her accents were just out of this world, but I had to build up courage to listen to them. So the book had been out for a while, and then I went, okay, I'm going to listen to this, and it's such a you kind of fall into it. First of all, you go, is that how she sounds? Okay, well, all right. And then you fall into it. And it's like, after a while, you have to remind yourself that you wrote the book.
Yeah.
Because it's such a new experience.
Yeah.
And, I mean, I don't know if you've noticed, but over the last maybe even 5 years or so, the quality of audio, of narrators, has just skyrocketed. And, these hugely talented narrators are available to narrate books, and they just do such a phenomenal job. So sorry, I'm getting away from your question. I had nothing to do with it, but it was just a delight. And then Caroline Hewitt is another actress who has some German experience. So she narrated The Woman at the Wheel, and I think she did a phenomenal job there as well. But it was it was the same experience for me. Once I was less fearful of listening to it because I had listened to it before, to the Invincible Miscast. I was like, no, these people know what they're doing. They've done a great job. But it is honestly like hearing your words for the first time in many ways.
You're coming at it from a reader's perspective. Then you're hearing your own work. Fantastic. I think that's absolutely wonderful. And so again, they're all available as well. You can get all of those sort of things. So so the last thing really what I kind of wanted to talk to you about was what sort of drives you to write historical fiction particularly? Is there anything that sort of motivates you to do that, or is it just something that is in you?
Well, as I explained, I kind of came to it by mistake. I am something of I love history. I'm very fascinated by it. But I think part of it is maybe because from working as a journalist, I'm used to research. So it doesn't worry me. It doesn't fill me with any anxiety or anything. I kind of know how you go about it, and the other thing is that I've discovered that some of the best stories come from history. So,
Yes.
you
Yeah.
know,
Yes, absolutely.
so yeah. But so I've got another two books which will be historical fiction in the same vein about women, kind of that you know that people who read fiction might not have heard about. So you know, as biographical historical fiction, you know,
Mhm.
you might go, wow, this is actually based on truth. So but you might not have read about it, about her, if she wasn't presented in fiction. I love that idea that you discover people, you go, wow, I didn't know this story, you
Yeah.
know, and you
Yeah.
wouldn't have found out about it because you're not someone who looks for biographies or so. So I've got another two in that vein. And then I'm not 100% sure if I won't go back to contemporary fiction because I also love that. So
Yeah. Yeah.
but I really am loving the historical fiction. It's fabulous. It suits me.
Yeah. Is it the sort of 19th century era, the Victorian era that you find
Yes. Well,
fascinating?
I've actually gone to the one that I'm working on now is the 18th century, the new one, and the one after that is a bit later. It is Mary Leakey, who was the British archaeologist and
Archaeologists.
paleanthropologist, yeah, who
Yes.
worked
Yes.
predominantly in East Africa. And
Yeah.
that one is more recent.
Wasn't
That
she
was
the one,
coming.
was it her son, or was it her who found Lucy? Um,
No, yes, but you're on the right track.
yeah.
Lucy was not found by her, but they found her husband's name was Lewis Leakey,
Right.
and her son's name was Richard Leakey,
Right.
who they were both archaeologists,
Mhm.
and Lewis and Mary started the investigations at Olduvai Gorge, which is in Tanzania, where they found the skulls of Zinj, and so they were all that. It's Lucy was one link, and Lucy came a bit later, and that was a someone else. But
Yeah.
you're on the right track.
Yeah,
Yes.
the
Yeah.
the name when you mentioned it, that popped into my mind because I read
Yeah.
that book, Lucy. I thought, oh, okay, so I know what you're talking about. That's
Yeah.
well, don't give too much more away.
Yeah.
Let's
Yeah.
find that out. So when is that coming out?
That comes out in February next year.
Okay, all
Yeah.
right. So that's your kind of next deadline, is it?
Well, actually, I just sent my copy edits back about a week ago, and I'm waiting to see the cover. So, you know, Paul, just to go back when I mentioned that when the cover like that with people, you know, we talk about the indie and the traditional
Mm,
publishing side. I mean, obviously there are so many things like cover design and the audio rights, which we spoke about, and all those things which I don't have to stress about
yeah,
because my publisher does that. Um, but you know, my editor does want my input, which is really lovely.
yeah,
Um, but because as a traditional author, they've paid me in advance for it, so it is their book at this point. So you know, one is grateful to be allowed to say things like, well, I wouldn't want that on the cover. I think maybe we should do this. But as an author who is not entirely independent because they've bought the book, the final say does lie with them.
yeah, of
So
course.
so
Yeah,
that is the difference, you know,
yeah.
whereas when you independent, you're making every single decision.
Mm,
And so, you know, I mean, if there are independent authors who are thinking of going the traditional route, it's something that I think you have to think about, is that if you are hoping to get a traditional deal, and it does to some degree depend on the author, I think. I mean, I'm sorry about the publisher, because some
yeah,
publishers want more involvement than others.
yeah.
But you have to accept that there are things that will be taken away from you
Mm,
and that you don't have the final say. I mean, with my publisher, with the titles of my books, we together, my editor and I come up with up to 10 ideas that we might have. And of course, I have one that I really, really want.
yeah.
But then the author, then the publisher puts those 10 ideas out to a test. They test readers. They've got groups of readers. They give them a synopsis of the book. They say, this is what the book's going to be, right? Vote on your title. And the title comes back and you go, that was my fourth choice, but it's not your book. So there is that mindset that, that it's not all advantageous to, I mean, you have to trust your publisher, because obviously you have to trust that they know what readers want and what the market wants. And you can have your artistic hissy fit or whatever you want to call it, but it ain't going to work. So that, that's one of the things that I think that one should consider. And it really is a case of learning to rein yourself in, I guess, a little bit on that as a traditional author.
Yeah. So I mean, it sounds like source books are right for you. Then there's still that collaboration, which is fantastic.
It is fantastic.
When you're writing it, it's your baby almost, isn't it? It is hard, I should imagine, to let it go. So that that is one of the pros and cons of indie and traditionally publishing. So where are all your books available now? Are you published wide, or are they specifically on Amazon?
No, they are published wide.
Okay.
So you should be able, obviously, if you don't find them in your local bookstore, they should be able to order them and get them for you straight away. But published wide.
Well, as we're in the digital world at the moment, I'll put links to everything in the description too, so people can go and connect with you, but also go and get the books as well, which is absolutely fantastic.
Yeah.
But listen, Penny, thank you so much for coming on today. It's been a real pleasure speaking to you. It's so nice to speak to somebody who's traditionally published. And who is as disciplined as you, because I will freely admit to being not as disciplined as I want to be. As having said, now I've just finished I'm doing the rewrites right now for my next, which is hopefully, and this is again the difference, I suppose, between indie and traditionally published. I can say hopefully it will come out in the next sort of 3 or 4 weeks at the end of April. I'm waiting for the cover design to come back for my approval, really. So
yes,
again,
I look forward to seeing it.
So listen, thank you so much for coming on today. It's been
a pleasure.
Absolute pleasure. And I wish you all the very best. Please let us know when your next titles and your next work is coming out, and it would be lovely to have you to come back on again, and we could talk some more.
Thank you, Paul. And I'm very grateful. I mean, just to go back to the discipline thing, I think that's also part of being a journalist. And I kind of encourage people who feel like they aren't to set your own deadlines, because I'm deadline driven because of my history, but I think authors are very good at putting things off, and it's too easy to do.
It really can be. It really can be.
Thank you very much, Paul. It was lovely to talk to you.
And to you.
I appreciate the invitation. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for joining us on another captivating episode of the Page Turnerz podcast. We hope you enjoyed delving into the pages with us, discovering new stories, and revisiting beloved classics. If you're as passionate about books as we are, don't forget to subscribe to our podcast and leave a review. Your feedback keeps us bringing you fascinating discussions, author interviews, and book recommendations. Remember, the adventure never ends when you have a book in hand. Until next time, keep turning those pages and let the magic of storytelling continue to inspire your imagination. Happy reading.